You know, a year ago when I originally covered Diamond and Pearl, I expected that to be the only time, but due to incompetence, the video being pretty much unwatchable, a lack in properly saying things, and most importantly, sheer laziness, I felt it just to go back and look at our game that I formerly crowned the only bad Pokemon game. And with better understanding of games and elaborating points, and more importantly presentation, I'll see if I can satisfy the thirst to make that work of art called Diamond and Pearl. You know, a year after it became basically pointless. Thanks, BDSP. So, with my ranting and justification to reopen this can of worms aside, your timestamps are on screen, and now it's time to not completely slam Diamond and Pearl with an in-depth review, instantly skewed towards bad, but instead both good and bad. Greeting us in the world of Diamond and Pearl is the Sinnoh region, a messy expanse featuring lots of play space and good ideas that could have used a second draft. As in size and scale, it's pretty big, which seems good at first, but manages to come with a few downsides of its own. But looking at the positives first, play space, lots of it, but get this, the game actually gives you incentive to actually explore the damn thing. Something the Gen 2 games spat in the face of with a full quantity over quality approach, as here we see a damn fine balance, with stuff like hidden locations, loads of optional trainers to milk for EXP, better wild encounter variety, and of course useful items which for some reason seemingly fly under the radar. Of course, these are the obvious examples. And it's funny, because none of these concepts are new, it's just the execution was just actually good this time around. Also, we have true post-game areas, giving the player far more reasons to keep playing after beating the game. Oh yeah, the Generation 2 day-night cycle returns as well, and immersive with its gameplay impact intact. But guess what? That's all the good stuff. Oh yes, this was deceptively short, but the goods are good, and now things get a little dicey. Where else to start but the movement? While basically unchanged from Generation 3, we have this. Snow clumps that exist to slow the player down, made worse with swampy areas that'll bring the game to a crawl, only bring a negative impact towards the game, to bring in immersion where it wasn't quite needed. Fun! A new groundbreaking change is your ability to run inside every building now, not just the dungeons. Next is the HMs, because yeah, there's an issue here. But that's obvious, because the entire mechanic is flawed itself. If I've ranted about it once, that means I've done it 30 times. HMs in Diamond and Pearl are downright oppressive at times, and not a thrill to deal with. There's 8 HMs and 6 are mandatory to beat the game. Make that 7 because there's no way you're gonna skip out on the fly. But wait, this isn't that bad. No, not until you realize how much the game wants you to spam these things everywhere, keeping move slots or entire Pokemon on your team out of commission. But hold on, it gets worse. Because who cares about how much they get in the way of your teams? Just getting a few of them is mildly frustrating alone. Like many things in this video, you already know exactly where I'm going and how, but just simply getting the HMs for Strength and Defog is just annoying, as they're both in what comes off as completely optional locations, but surprisingly are not. Outside of Strength, you have 0 reasons to even visit the Lost Tower. Even if the trip to the 3rd gym wasn't a long one, it's not like the game ever does a good job at making it aware to the player that they even need to go here at all. Defog, on the other hand, is less insulting, as it's just on one of the people by the Safari Zone entrance. But of course, defog is still optional regardless. Oh, but do you know the big annoyance with defog? The fact we already had a mechanic and an HM prior to remove a big annoying hazard that makes exploring annoying. And the kicker, you ask? Yep, this sure is a great view I have here. But thankfully, we have one final note with Sinnoh itself: backtracking. Most games are not immune to the obnoxious use of time that backtracking is, and Diamond and Pearl, like with their overuse of HMs, is a massive offender here. So how many backtracking trips during the main story do we have total? Let's count that right now with a visual aid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 12 alone before considering that you're probably going to need a backtrack to unlock the post-game. Now, while it's obvious most of these are for advancing the plot or to be able to even reach the destination to advance the plot, that's not an excuse, but a reasoning as to why these backtracking trips exist. Made worse when you remember Fly is supposed to be an optional HM, but here we see the game begging you to build your team around that just so you don't waste a large chunk of your time just to hop around this mess of a region. Again, Sinnoh in concept is great, but in execution, it just has a lot of issues. Good highs and some bad lows. Quality and quantity in a gross mix that works sometimes, but not always. But hey, on a much more positive note, we're moving on to the highs and lows of the gameplay itself. The first part of the gameplay to discuss is the replayability factors, so the Pokemon selection, the trainers, and basically everything else that you have to deal with when normally playing through the game. So, to sound like a broken record at this point, Pokemon selection in Diamond and Pearl isn't good, as the Pokedex is a grim 150, the bare minimum for the series, and guess what? The variety is not good. Now, the redeeming quality first is the fact that you're actually able to fight most of the Pokemon in the regional Pokedex with minimal exceptions, but in terms of actually playing with them, we have a load of problems. First off is the type imbalance. You already know where this is going. In the game, there's only a grand total of 2 Ice-type evolution lines and 2 Fire-type evolution lines, with Fire being in a worse spot as one of those is the damn starter. This alone heavily skews your starter choice towards Fire, as Grass has 5 options excluding the starter, and Water has 16 other options. Yeah, there's 17 of them total, and when you think about how there's only 2 Fire and Ice types and 3 Electric types, it really makes you wonder how this travesty even happened in the first place. This balance is awful. But other fun numbers include the fact there's 10 Psychic types, 11 Normal types, and 12 Flying types. Now, Flying and Normal have a massive glaring issue, and that's when you see that number, and then you look back at Fire, Ice, and Electric, because Flying and Normal don't actually have boss trainers associated with them, unlike those 3 typings that have pitiful Pokemon counts. Yeah, for some reason, the 3 types completely starved of Pokemon options were deemed good enough for boss trainers, and that's a walking crime right there. But oh boy, we'll get back to that, as you're probably saying, wait, there's 6 Electric types in Sinnoh, you're forgetting Magnezone and stuff. No pal, I didn't forget anything. The game did. 5 new Electric types, and half of them were left out of the main game, and this is just me focusing on one type as a big noteworthy piece the Pokedex was just forgotten about in the main game altogether. 106 new Pokemon in the game, and 27 of them cannot even be gotten during the main game. That's close to a quarter of them. Now let's make exceptions for the 5 mythicals because duh, and the 4 post-game legendaries because post-game content, duh again. We get left with 18 new Pokemon, 1 random post-game mon, and 17 evolutions to old pre-existing mons from the older generations. And may I note, these are not the only of their kind, as a few others already exist in the game and are actually obtainable during the main story. Congratulations, we have some new Pokemon here that easily could have fixed the Pokemon variety issue, but they were intentionally left out. So now all we have to look at is this sad excuse for a Pokedex. Now, to remind you, this Pokedex of 150 hardly works because of how restricting it is in the team builder, essentially being forced into the Fire starter if you actually want to use a Fire type being the obvious highlight, and then add others for your limitations like version exclusive Pokemon, trait evolution Pokemon, your inability to sit here and stand by the honey tree, stuff like Spiritomb and Melodic being needlessly tedious to get, the frustrations of the baby Pokemon providing nothing worthwhile to the count, then you have to build your team around the never-ending use cases of HMs. It just adds up too fast and suffocates you for no reason in a part of the game that should be fun. Moving off the Pokemon variety for you, we have to look at the boss trainers, and it is, get this, also foul. While most of the gym leaders and Elite Four members are exempt from this issue, Candace, Volkner, Flint, and to a lesser extent Aaron, all have the issue of not having teams piled up with the typing that they were designed to be associated with. While one gets a pass due to how evolutions work, the other 3 are a bit of a sin, because remember, this is a game where the gym leaders and Elite Four members are based on a single typing. So when we have standouts like this who don't fit the bill, or don't have the ability to because they were avoiding a Yellow Koga and Crystal Claire moment, allowing it to become more of an issue, and that's just because they don't have options they can even use. Look, I know this as much as you do, that these random Pokemon being slapped on the teams is ironically better in making the teams not as bad. But again, this is a flaw spitting in the face of the gym leader plus Elite Four member design of one type only. But something that was never going to be a non-issue is the level curve. Because get this, the level curve isn't good. While the early game shows promise, everything proceeds to fall apart after the second gym, as 2 boss trainers after the second gym level-wise just completely stay under-leveled to the second gym leader's team. So the level pacing just comes to a crawl for absolutely no reason. But if you thought that was a pain, just wait, because once you reach Gym 3, we see another issue, one I gave Gold and Silver a lot of flack for, as the level curve comes to a dead stop, as both Gyms 3 and 4 manage to have 3 Pokemon that each, crazily enough, have matching levels with one another, meaning between the 2 gyms, there is no progression at all, since, get this, you can actually choose the order in which you battle these two gyms. Dude, that's revolutionary! Needless to say, it was probably a cheap attempt to throw in some more replayability, and of course making the level curve worse is ironically making the replayability worse in turn, completely spitting in the face of the entire idea of choosing gyms out of order, as it just completely failed to have any incentive for you to pick and choose an order itself. You know, a concept the Johto games actually understood, and the game makes it even worse, as by delaying the third gym doesn't even really work since you still have to do gyms 3 and 4 to even progress the story. It's just one extra backtracking trip with nothing of value to it, completely killing the idea of choosing an order. Thankfully at this point, the level curve pretty much stops being an obvious issue for a while, until you reach the Pokemon League. Here we are given the worst example of Elite Four level laddering we've ever seen in the series. First off, Mister, that's a term you just made up. It's not real. Yes, I made this term to explain the awful level jump the Pokemon League challenge gets played with. Artificially make the fights harder the later in the challenge you go, but not harder because of the teams in question. It becomes a problem because of the levels of your team. You'll want to level up to be on par with the champion. Doing so means with a bad Elite Four level ladder, it will make the rest of the Elite Four trainers stupidly underwhelming in comparison, because you will be over leveled. Where on the opposite side of the spectrum, whose levels are on par with, let's say, the first Elite Four member, will absolutely struggle because of a bad level jump across all the later trainers. This is something the first 4 generation of Pokemon games struggle with a lot more than the others, but I just claimed Diamond and Pearl had the worst one though. So let's peek at those levels actually. Look at Aaron's team, 53 minimum, 57 peak. Bertha, Flint, and Lucian all go up by 2 on each of their mons, leaving the champion with a 60 minimum and a 66 maximum. That's an increase of 7 minimum, 9 max. A total gap of 13 levels from worst to best. That is a large gap, the same as the Generation 1 games for a matter of fact, and it's just simply not okay, as it just serves to be a massive grind wall while potentially trivializing some of the challenge that it's supposed to have. Made worse, of course, by everyone's favorite, heal spamming. Anyways, now that I've ruined any enjoyment for numbers that you may have had, let's take a detour and just talk about the mechanical changes, where we see a lot more positives, and of course, the game's biggest strengths. Generation 4 commonly gets referred to as having the best, but still simplistic gameplay among the series. Crazy to say that given how everything else around the game is rough, but hey, that's what isolating the mechanics will do. Starting us off are the 3 words that single-handedly revitalized many Pokemon from just not being very good to halfway okay, or to extremely good. Physical, special, split. So, for a reminder, in the first 3 generations of Pokemon games, there were 3 categories of attacks. Status moves don't really apply here, so we'll just forget they exist. But physical and special moves had their categories decided by the attack's typing, and that alone. Basically, take the evolutions and add Dragon to it. Those are special and everything else is physical. It led to a lot of issues like some Pokemon not being able to use the attacks of their same typing, because look at Ledian, Sneasel, or Kingler. 2 of those have a good attack stat while their typing would not allow them to actually use the attack stat, as of course those moves would be special. Other examples of crippled Pokemon like this would be Breloom with its grass typing, Absol, Feraligatr, Gengar, and Pelipper with its flying typing, just to name a few. And another layer of issues up here, like how you can have a Groudon with Fire Punch and Flamethrower for instance. One attack completely outclassed the other across the board. That was it, there was nothing better than the other. And other attacks sit in this boat as well. But now thankfully every attack was given its own category for simply existing, now giving use to far more Pokemon by indirectly making them better. More attacks across the board becoming more relevant, being a massive mechanical improvement. Yeah, something like Dodrio losing out on physical tri-attack sucks, but on the opposite hand, Groudon having an excuse to run Fire Punch, or that laundry list of Pokemon I mentioned earlier love having that extra edge. Overall, a fantastic change to the gameplay that the games would have been way worse without, unlike our next edition, a new weather mentioned earlier being fog. It adds nothing to the game, except being an absolute dread because it hurts the gameplay, by exclusively providing all the Pokemon in play an obnoxiously large chance to miss their attacks. Thankfully, there's no way to set it up in battle other than being in an area within the overworld, which actually gives you incentive to use the default HM, which sure, it is optional, but now there's a gameplay negative for actually ignoring it. That, or just get rid of the weather without actually wasting a move slot, which is still annoying, but it's a way better alternative. Now, other gameplay improvements include obvious stuff like new Pokemon, abilities, and more importantly items, giving the game a phenomenal item balance and selection across the entire board, minus the bloat that the later gens have. Now, other than those two big changes, we have quite a handful of small ones to pretend to care about. So first, a minor mention of TMs, as we got an extra 42 for simply existing. The problem is the catch, as with all these new TMs, they had to put some of them in the post-game, but sadly the numbers connected to them are irrelevant in indicating what is and what isn't post-game, which is a shame organization-wise. But of course these additions are still a positive. Poison will actually go away in the overworld if a Pokemon afflicted with it reaches 1 HP, preventing them from fainting needlessly. A small cosmetic addition is the Pokemon gender differences. All it does is change something small on the Pokemon sprite. That's it, nothing else. Okay, so I typically try to avoid mentioning small stuff like attack rebalancing, especially when it comes to like a start of a new generation, but this one specifically is funny, and that is the struggle change, giving the attack way more recoil damage. Important to note because it fixes a battling situation that could appear in competitive, where two Wobbuffets with leftovers could never KO each other, while also never being able to switch out, forcing the battle into an infinite loop because they cannot damage each other, and then once they start struggling, they just heal off the damage, which puts the game into an infinite loop until one player decides to give in. Truly beautiful, and easily my personal favorite change in the game, just because it's funny. Sick. Next is an adjustment to Deoxys. In Generation 3, its form was dependent on the game being played. It was very anti-consumer, but thankfully this Pokemon can now actually have its form changed at will regardless of the game, just by interacting with these rocks to change the Pokemon's form while becoming the new standard. An obvious good change. And on a random note of forgettable features, we have this fella. Yeah, Chatot has an exclusive attack with a neat feature baked in, as its exclusive attack Shatter can actually change its cry when used in the Pokemon menu. Truly a fun feature that would never be responsible for Chatot getting banned in the competitive scene or having the feature straight up removed. Totally not. So congrats. Let's shuffle from niche but small talking points to get this. Even more niche but small talking points. Yep, a third section on the gameplay with small changes worth mentioning that don't really fit into the battling mechanics or the experience of actually playing the game. Just stuff that's there. First up being the obvious gameplay improvements that take place out of battle, obviously, like the bag. Now, unlike the first three generations of Pokemon games, the arbitrary limit of the items that you can keep in your bag was actually thrown out. Now, of course, incentivizing picking up every item you'll see because you're never risking an item cap, wasting your time, forcing you to throw out stuff that you should otherwise be keeping. Oh yeah, because of this change, the item storage in the PC was removed. It's small, but someone was gonna yell about it if I didn't mention it. On the thought of useful features, we now see our first example of free unlimited use move tutors. Only a few attacks were given out this way, but hey, at least something. But those are the positives, meaning now it's time to complain, everyone's favorite. A fun battle annoyance is the fact that important trainers in battle will just talk periodically. It just provides nothing of value at all. Just a minor annoyance that plagues generations 4, 5, and 8. But hey, it all began here, and it's just so damn fun. Shut up! Next is the journal. Just a recap of events you performed on the previous days that you played prior. It's a neat automatic log, but like, you don't need it to just manually appear when you log in, and sometimes it does, and it's just a mild inconvenience. Thankfully, just saving the game will make it go away for a while, unlike with Fire Red and Leaf Green. Also, before I forget, honey trees are the worst. Apply honey to a tree, wait for the Pokemon to appear, forget about it, complain on Twitter. Easy! But wait. One more thing. Starting a new game actually requires you to delete the save file on the game, as you cannot save over it ever, effectively wasting your time if you forget this mild inconvenience is even in the game. Overall, this list wasn't so big, but they would have been otherwise problematic to not mention, so there you go. Oh great, the side and post-game content. You already know where we're going, so let's get it over with. The post-game is the most obnoxious part of the entire game, because once you beat the game, all you unlock is one new area in the godforsaken Battle Tower. To unlock the actual post-game, you have to see every Pokemon in the Pokedex, which despite there being only 150 Pokemon in the main game, it's still a chore that requires you to go out of your way to even achieve, and it's a big problem when easily skippable trainers have the Pokemon that you're looking to fight, and there's only one trainer in the game with the Pokemon you're even looking for in the first place. Most players are not going out of their way to battle every single trainer in the game. So sure, maybe the Mothim trainer's on them because it's sitting in plain sight, but Vermi is just out of the way on a path that doesn't have any value, or the damn Driftloon trainer being in a gym behind a door that requires you to fail simple math. Skipping this one in particular requires you to wait until a specific day to hopefully remember that there's a static spawn for the Pokemon, and it's just frustrating. Made even more annoying when you actually have to worry about the catch rates of the legendaries that most players are actually going to catch instead of kill. This being the one case of a roaming Pokemon being a positive for the game. These are the common examples of Pokemon that'd be skipped in the game. Not even counting the other common ones like Finneon, Riolu being in an egg in an optional location that you still need to hatch, Wormadam which is on a 2-path route, and Tentacle. Yes, this common Pokemon is easy to miss and it's not even funny. Look, even if this chase to find everything in the Pokedex wasn't complete filler content that punishes you for not battling every single trainer in the game, there is absolutely no reason I have to use the internet or a guidebook to find the only Cherim trainer in the entire game, located in the middle of nowhere. It's just criminal behavior. So congrats, you somehow found everything in the Pokedex and unlocked the actual postgame, meaning we can finally dive into all the content the game has to offer. So let's begin with the Battle Tower, and we will never speak on it again, even if objectively its inclusion is good for the game. Actually, never mind. Let's just quickly name all the returning features with little to no change. Berry growing returns, and now with mulch that would absolutely never be removed in a remake. The VS Seeker being copy and pasted so some trainers can actually be rebattled. The game corner and its slot machines again made perfect with buyable coins. Oracles of Silver, I'm still looking at you. The Safari Zone returns and is now bogged down by swamp areas, making it a nightmare to navigate even with extra post-game Pokemon. The Pokedex returns with some minor additions like extra language options that you can't even read, alongside the national mode and height and weight comparisons. Contests returned with a redesigned round 1 for dressing your Pokemon up, a new dance show, and all around a lot more depth across the board. Ribbon collecting has a much larger selection of ribbons and better presentation by easily being able to find them in the menus, but hey, congrats, that's the returning content. As for new content, there's the Pal Park, allowing you once a day to transfer 6 Pokemon from Generation 3 games up with their held items, and doing a pointless catching minigame. Good feature, sloppy execution. But of course, it gets ruined if you mess with the clock at all or try switching systems. Because similarly to the game Swarms, doing these loopholes thinking you can speed up the process will only lock you out of the features for no valid reason. Now, rounding out the post-game content is the pillars of the post-game Pokemon obtainable. Once the post-game is unlocked, extra features allow for more Pokemon to be caught. Swarm similar to Generation 2 in its old manner in a more regulated one, getting an increased encounter pool just from having one of the Generation 3 games in your DS, and the actual new feature in the Poke Radar, which just really gets used to chain the same encounter, find exclusive Pokemon, or find shiny Pokemon. Congrats, we've talked about the post-game offering, but notice as there's no Gym Leader rematches or Elite Four Round 2 to be seen. Because why would you want to have meaningful post-game content when you can have all this random stuff instead? Despite this miss, at least there's still some more side features to play along with. So let's talk about them in order of least impactful to most impactful. Starting with the most useless mechanic in the games is a decrepit waste of development resources being Pokemon following you. Locked to the Amity Square in Hearthome City, you get to take a select pool of Pokemon out of their Pokeball to follow you around, and it's pretty pointless. Yeah, there's more Pokemon in the post-game that you can use, but other than the amulet coin in this area, the only real use for this is to get some contest dress-up accessories or extra berries used to make Poffins. Which crazy is, that's our next topic! It's a simple minigame to make Poffins to be used for contest stats for the most obnoxious evolution ever made, all while exclusively using the touchscreen. Yeah, it's mostly nothing. But you know what's cooler than both of those features? Cleaning your gym badges! Yes! This is the hype gameplay that I've always been looking for! Yes, sir! Another relatively irrelevant feature is the Pokeball seals, serving as a cute feature to apply extra effects to your Pokemon's balls when they are sent out, and they prevent you from storing them in the PC because duh, they needed the game to be a little more annoying. Next up is the Underground, being an empty map beneath Sinnoh itself in which you can farm a nice variety of items, build secret bases, and of course play with your friends, and then complain about having to manually send items to your bag. Seriously, why is this here? Look, the Underground is neat and all, but I just want to talk to the person who thought getting the Explorer kit needed to be mandatory, just to give them a piece of my mind, as this feature is never even forced in the game itself. But hey, look, you get to play Capture the Flag, so Diamond and Pearl are S tier games games by default. And ending off the features that are still usable in modern day is the Pokédge, the multi-purpose tool that resides on your bottom screen with a handful of useful features, like displaying your team's current status, a friendship checker, a calendar, a clock, a daycare checker, a map that tracks the roaming legendaries to make them tolerable to track down, and a notepad, among other various features. Sadly, of course, most of these have to be unlocked. But of course, our final feature is online play. While wireless play is present, online play took its reach a step further, granting the ability to battle and trade to the internet. While now discontinued, saying it wasn't an important feature would be a massive lie. But in terms of features, that just about does it. As made clear by the absolute laundry list of content of varying quality, Diamond and Pearl did proceed to surpass expectations. In the visual and musical departments, Diamond and Pearl both strive and struggle at the same time. As in terms of the music, the overworld for the most part is strong, made better with most areas having a daytime and nighttime version, making up for the fact that on average the game's battle music is pretty weak, not having many positive standouts, while having a handful of stinkers, including a copy and paste that only makes the second version worse. And visually, the game's scale feels a lot larger, looking less flat than what we saw in Generation 3, made nicer with an abundance of terrain variety, again made nicer by the set pieces, and the story pieces that actually take place look appealing. But of course, on the other hand, we have stuff like how these grasslands are just not very pretty. Is it the shading? You tell me. It's a shame because the game's art style is just a little bit weaker than what Generation 3 had going for it, all three games included. Plus, the menus in these games are actually pretty damn nice. For the Pokemon, lots of details, and most of it's organized pretty damn nicely. Not to mention making the in-battle menus pretty neat as well, despite being a little barren. Perfect use of the 2DS screens. Overall, the game's presentation's solid. Yeah, there's a few issues, but it's far from bad. Let's make this quick. Performance-wise, Diamond and Pearl have issues out the wazoo, as simple tasks like choosing an attack in battle will have lag on them, made noticeably worse in double battles. Still, in battle, the game doesn't like loading two shiny sparkles at once and tries freaking out when they appear. Leaving battle, there's fun stuff like the criminally horrific surf speed, the HP bars taking longer to go away than it does for you to get up in the morning, whatever these dot things are that keep trying to ruin the game's overworld visuals. For some reason, you can't even ride the damn bike through the route gate, despite Fire Red and Leaf Green showing us that it's completely possible. Do I even need to mention how the game has to save a lot of data just from even touching a single Pokemon in the PC? Or do I need to remind you how this garbage is in the other Gen 4 and 5 games and is much rarer to come across? And these have been the noteworthy performance issues. Look, we can always take a look at glitches in general, but it seems kind of pointless. So let's just shout out three that I handpicked for being neat. Fun stuff like the Acid Rain glitch, No Guard users simply ignoring Protect sometimes, or Magic Guard simply preventing the paralysis turn loss from ever occurring. There's a lot of fun oddities like this, but these are the ones regulated to battle that I found fun. God forbid I even need to mention the Void glitch, but congrats. It's time for us to move on to everyone's favorite topic in a Pokemon game, especially to open videos with, the story. Like most Pokemon games, the story, to nobody's surprise, is nothing special and very cookie-cutter in the grand scheme of things. Get this right, the professor puts you on an endless text loop to take and complete the Pokédex. And yes, to unlock the post-game, you will complete the Pokédex, before deciding to go chase down and beat all the gym leaders to battle the Pokemon League, simping over Cynthia, and then of course beating the game. Along the way, you deal with two entities. Your rival, duh, why wouldn't there be one? And Team Galactic, an evil team, duh, why wouldn't there be one? These guys want to create a new world because the current one is bad. Because, like in our own world, Among Us fell off, and that is the most unforgivable crime imaginable. So of course, their leader goes off, trying to get the game's legendary to make a new world, just for you to ruin the plan in the end. And then you live happily ever after. And as for the rival, despite being an annoyance, he's surprised, much like the plot, very cookie cutter. A friendly rival who's impatient and annoying, going through a minor character arc, but after the game's climax, he just essentially resets for no reason, like it just never happened. Speaking of nothing happening, the post-game is very similar, featuring a treasure hunt where an irrelevant character gets a treasure from a volcano, then returns it. Congrats, the post-game's a waste of narrative space. It's downright impressive how terrible this is. Look at that, a summarized story while getting all the important stuff across in a timely manner while cutting out the filler entirely. In close, Diamond and Pearl are not as bad as I made them out to be a year ago. Don't get it twisted, the games are still suffering from quality control issues, but to pretend there aren't any redeemable qualities would be a sin, as there's quite a handful. Again, in its gameplay mechanics, the game excels, but that was dragged down by the muddy experience that is basically every other edition brought to the table. Negatives including a horrible grind wall through overall bad level pacing, bad Pokemon variety, one bad battle edition, the region feeling needlessly bloated, too much backtracking, over-reliance on the game's multiplayer features, mediocre performance, another nothing story, and generally questionable decisions that really hurt the game a lot. But the redeeming qualities on the other hand are small in comparison, really coming down to just the music, the graphics, and the core gameplay mechanics. Look, I know the games have arguably the best core gameplay mechanics in the series due to its generation, not only making for one of the best singles competitive scenes yet, but even being the birthplace of official competitive doubles, actually driving in a lot of people to the competitive scene in general. But to what end does this positive go to carry the game for? As it's only a very small piece of an immense puzzle. The legacy these games left behind was very important. We can all agree on that, but of course, looking at how the games are here and now, legacy doesn't apply to the game's overall quality. So of course, do I recommend you play Pokemon Diamond and Pearl? Say it with me, absolutely not. Regardless of the game's quality in question, bad by the way, the game simply has two substitutes, one that managed to fix pretty much most of the game's issues, and another that's basically just the same game, but a little bit better, but also in Generation 8. There's just not really a place to go back and play it ever. Now, unlike the Should You playlist, which actually takes other games into account, looking towards a score, this time, I won't make the mistake of taking other games into consideration, because it's not that helpful, or even necessary, but also the list has actual structure now, so there's no guessing and needing to wing it. Look, Diamond and Pearl isn't objectively bad, and for me last year to assume this was just wrong. But yeah, a score. Previously a 1.8 out of 10, now coming in around a 3.1 out of 10. These games are a struggle, but for the wrong reasons. Once upon a time, for years, Diamond and Pearl used to be my favorite Pokemon games, but I remember clearly when that fell out of favor, much like Heart Gold Soul Silver in that regard. And now, while I still have a soft spot for the game, I'm gonna make that abundantly clear. Nostalgia, obviously. I struggle even now to call it good, as there's a difference between good and enjoyment, but maybe that's just because I'm a little over analytical. And for those thinking I'm not personable enough, there you go, personal experience. But as for the video itself, it's more so a case of wanting to get it right. As I said in the intro, that old video was relatively unwatchable. See if you can spot a typo in this anywhere. Surprise, it's Pelipper. I just was not satisfied at all. So with this one here, I went on a warpath to find everything. You know, reference getters, I have a few things to say. Thank you for watching as a first. But secondly, don't expect another re-review for a while. This one was only done when it was so I could actually work on something before Scarlet and Violet without trying to force Sun and Moon out the door way too early. Yes, I know other videos need a re-review as well, because ew, this is a criminal offense and then some. But I just want to finish the rest of the mainline games before going on to that perfectionist grind set that I seem to have an obsession with. The next video for the mainline games should be obvious, Scarlet and Violet, because why wouldn't I? And with that, I've said everything that I need to. Farewell.